Section 1. Opening Banter and Health Discussions. The conversation begins with Joe Rogan and McCusker discussing the prevalence of ring lights on tables that content creators use to improve their appearance on camera. They joke about men using filters on photos, with Rogan noting that some comedians use filters and Netflix applies them to promotional photos for comedy specials. The discussion shifts to aging, with Rogan revealing he's 58 and McCusker just turned 40. McCusker notes he aged immediately after having kids due to lack of sleep. This leads into an extended discussion about supplements and health optimization. Rogan recommends creatine for sleep deprivation, suggesting working up to 20 grams daily, though he splits his dose into 10 grams morning and night to avoid digestive issues. McCusker shares he's been taking it and experienced similar digestive effects at higher doses. Rogan mentions he takes vitamin D with K2 and magnesium for optimal absorption, explaining that studies show pairing vitamin D with dietary fats can boost serum levels by about 50%. McCusker reveals he's extremely sensitive to caffeine and had to quit completely, saying if he has coffee at 2 p.m. he won't sleep until midnight. He also stopped because caffeine eliminates his dreams at night and may interfere with divergent thinking needed for creative work. Section 2. Diet, fiber, and the carnivore debate. The conversation turns to diet and digestive health. McCusker describes being vegan for a month and getting hemorrhoids from massive bowel movements, joking he was like an adult entertainer. Rogan discusses the carnivore diet debate, noting carnivore advocates claim fiber isn't necessary while others present evidence it's beneficial. McCusker tried carnivore for 17 days and felt great initially but stopped pooping, concluding he needed vegetables. They discussed the old myth that John Wayne had 50 pounds of undigested meat in his colon when he died, which Rogan confirms is false. The discussion moves to historical eating patterns and how modern Americans eat far more than previous generations. Rogan notes the average Civil War soldier weighed 130 pounds because food was scarce. Hunter-gatherers typically got one meal per day and had to preserve meat by drying it into jerky. They reflect on how difficult life must have been without refrigeration, running water, or air conditioning, especially in harsh climates like Texas. Rogan recommends the book Empire of the Summer Moon about Texas settlers encountering the Comanche, emphasizing how tough people had to be to survive in that environment year-round. Section 3. COVID-19 Experiences and Pandemic Reflections. McCusker shares he had his first child in March 2020, right as the pandemic began, creating an anxious period of navigating restrictions and fears about bringing the virus home to his newborn. Rogan describes his own COVID experience, noting his family got it, but he never did despite close contact, including having sex with his wife while she was sick. He maintained his workout routine and took high doses of vitamins, which he believes helped his immune system resist infection. During the pandemic, Rogan tested everyone who came to his studio daily before allowing podcasts to proceed, and someone reported him to the health department for not following distancing protocols. McCusker describes finally getting COVID and being bedridden for 3 days with a high fever, worried he might die after talking so much trash about it. His wife got it 2 days later, but their young child never contracted it. Rogan notes kids generally burn through it quickly. They discuss the fear and propaganda surrounding the virus, with Rogan explaining that older people like Neil Young and Howard Stern were understandably more frightened given their age put them at higher risk. McCusker's parents, however, were construction workers who didn't care and refused to follow restrictions, telling him to come inside rather than gathering outdoors. Section 4. Epstein Files and Prince Andrew's arrest. The conversation shifts dramatically to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and the recent arrest of Prince Andrew. McCusker notes this is the first time in perhaps 500 years that a prince has been arrested, and if he goes to real jail, he'll likely be targeted by other inmates given the nature of his alleged crimes. Rogan discusses the layers of consequences Andrew has faced, being stripped of his royal titles, banished to an estate, then removed from that estate, and now arrested. They speculate the royal family must have seen damning evidence to take such severe actions. They examine the mysterious circumstances of Epstein's death in jail, including the incident 18 days before his death when he was found unresponsive with an orange fabric around his neck. His cellmate was Nicholas Tartagliani, a hulking former cop turned contract killer charged with 4 murders. Epstein initially claimed Tartagliani tried to kill him, though Tartagliani says he tried to save Epstein and that Epstein offered him money to kill him. The camera footage of both incidents was either lost or never captured. Rogan notes Epstein ordered 330 gallons of sulfuric acid after being indicted, which dissolves bodies, though some speculate it was for his desalination system. Section 5. Bob Lazar and UFO Revelations. Rogan shares his extensive conversations with Bob Lazar, the man who claims to have back-engineered UFOs at Area 51. Lazar was a propulsions expert at Los Alamos Labs who was recruited for a mysterious project. He was flown to a secret location where he was shown a craft with an American flag sticker on it. Initially thinking it was American technology, he soon realized it made no sense. No welds, no seams, designed for beings about 3 feet tall, with no conventional controls. The craft had a generator powered by element 115, which doesn't exist on Earth. When bombarded with radiation, it created a field allowing the craft to move silently and instantaneously from one location to another. Lazar worked on the project for months, but was suspended when his wife had an affair and authorities worried about his emotional stability. He then took friends to see the craft during scheduled test flights on Wednesdays. After being caught, he was threatened and went public with journalist George Knapp, initially with his face blacked out. He insisted on showing his face to stay alive, as they were threatening him. Someone shot his tire out on the highway and broke into his car without leaving evidence of forced entry. Authorities tried to discredit him, claiming he never worked at Los Alamos, but an employee roster from that period lists his name, and a newspaper article from the time identifies him as a physicist there. Section 6. Trump's comments on aliens and classified information. During the podcast, news breaks that President Trump was asked about Obama discussing aliens. Trump responds that Obama gave out classified information and shouldn't have done that, suggesting he might declassify the information to get Obama out of trouble. Rogan and McCusker analyzed this statement, concluding that if Trump says it's classified information, that essentially confirms aliens are real. McCusker wonders if this is setting up some kind of Space Force agenda, similar to how WMDs were used to justify Middle East interventions. They discuss how UFO disclosure became legitimized around 2017 when the New York Times published articles about pilots encountering crafts with no heat signature flying at ridiculous speeds. Rogan mentions people he's talked to say Russia and China have also retrieved crashed crafts. There's supposedly one craft so large they couldn't move it, so they built a building around it, allegedly in South Korea. A congressman has claimed a classified facility housing a UFO is hiding in plain sight, with speculation focusing on a 270-foot diameter building in South Korea. Rogan emphasizes the difficulty of knowing what's real with deep-fake technology advancing rapidly. Section 7. Social Work School and Academic Madness. McCusker shares his experience attending graduate school for social work, which he describes as ground zero for the ideological extremism Jordan Peterson warned about. He went to school to become a therapist and worked as a counselor at an inner-city Philadelphia charter school, which he loved. However, his master's program was dominated by discussions of race, gender, and oppression rather than clinical approaches. Classes would devolve into people crying and claiming they didn't feel safe. One student said she would never call the cops on a black person under any circumstances, and when McCusker asked what if the person was beating a woman, the room erupted in chaos. When Shane Gillies got in trouble with SNL, McCusker's name appeared in news coverage, and the student council moved to have him expelled. He had to defend himself before a board, which he recorded on his phone. Tells Rogan he thought he'd be around geniuses with master's degrees and PhDs, but found many hadn't read widely and would show Netflix documentaries in class. One proposed modality was activism therapy, where you get people politically active to motivate them. McCusker was appalled at the idea of taking confused, existentially adrift people and pushing them toward political activism. The school later asked if he wanted to get his PhD there, which he saw as purely about. Section 8. Comedy, Therapy, and Closing Topics. The conversation turns to comedy and the creative process. McCusker explains he can't write stand-up in a traditional way. Ideas have to pop into his head naturally. Rogan shares his method of writing essays on subjects, then extracting funny elements and building around them. They discuss the importance of bombing on stage, with Rogan arguing failure is crucial for growth. McCusker agrees, noting a good bomb motivates him to tighten his material. Rogan recalls Boston headliners who had polished 45-minute acts they'd been doing for 15 years, crushing every night but never adding new material, eventually becoming sad shells of themselves. They discuss therapy's effectiveness, with McCusker noting there are 40 million modalities and it varies tremendously by individual. He went to therapy himself while in social work school, expecting to blow the therapist's mind with how put together he was, but she picked him apart. He acknowledges therapy can be valuable, especially for people trapped in family systems with no outside perspective, but questions whether people should stay in therapy their whole lives. The conversation touches on psychiatrists being incentivized to prescribe medications, with Rogan sharing a friend's experience of being pushed toward antidepressants in the first meeting. They wrap up discussing McCusker's upcoming shows in Salt Lake City and Boise. As the episode winds down, Rogan and McCusker keep returning to the same theme. Most people are operating with second-hand certainty, while the real world is messier, funnier, and weirder. McCusker tells more body horror stories in his self-deprecating style, including how he cycled through multiple wrong diagnoses before finally getting treatment that worked. And Rogan uses that as a springboard to argue that institutional confidence often outruns real competence. They also revisit the comedy grind in concrete terms, describing the invisible workload behind a polished hour, bombing in small rooms, rewriting premises repeatedly, and learning cadence from failure rather than success. Rogan emphasizes that consistency beats inspiration, while McCusker frames stand-up as an emotional pressure valve that lets him metabolize anxiety and absurdity. They circle back to public trust and information warfare. If deepfakes become routine and institutions keep mishandling major stories, ordinary people will either become nihilistic or radicalized. Rogan says that when everything feels fake, people cling to whichever narrator sounds most confident. McCusker agrees, but adds that humor can still cut through propaganda because a joke exposes contradictions faster than a speech. That lands as one of the most revealing notes of the episode. Beneath the supplements, conspiracies, and grotesque anecdotes, both men are describing a world where attention is the scarce resource and credibility is the real currency. Their closing tone is not purely cynical. It is wary but pragmatic. Stay curious, keep your body functional, keep your bullshit detector calibrated, and do not outsource your entire model of reality to any one institution, influencer, or algorithm. Key takeaways: Rogan is 58, and McCusker just turned 40, with McCusker noting he aged dramatically after having kids due to sleep deprivation. Rogan recommends 20 grams of creatine daily for sleep issues, split into 2 doses, and emphasizes taking vitamin D with K2, magnesium, and dietary fats for optimal absorption. McCusker is extremely sensitive to caffeine and quit completely because it prevents him from sleeping and eliminates his dreams. The carnivore diet debate continues, with McCusker trying it for 17 days before concluding he needed vegetables, while carnivore advocates claim fiber is unnecessary. Historical Americans ate far less than modern people, with Civil War soldiers averaging 130 pounds and hunter-gatherers typically getting 1 meal per day. Prince Andrew's arrest marks the first time in perhaps 500 years a prince has been arrested, suggesting the royal family saw damning evidence from the Epstein files. Epstein's death remains suspicious, with his cellmate being a hulking former cop-turned-contract killer and camera footage of incidents either lost or never captured. Bob Lazar's account of back-engineering UFOs at Area 51 remains consistent after years, describing crafts with no welds designed for 3-foot-tall beings powered by element 115. Trump's statement that Obama gave out classified information about aliens essentially confirms their existence, according to Rogan's analysis. McCusker's social work graduate program exemplified the ideological extremism Peterson warned about, with classes dominated by discussions of oppression rather than clinical skills, and students attempting to expel him over his podcast. Therapy's effectiveness varies tremendously, with McCusker arguing it can provide valuable outside perspectives for people trapped in dysfunctional family systems, but questioning whether lifelong therapy is beneficial.